Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your favorite conservatarian, Jeff Charles, where we choose truth over narrative and principles over politics. And this is going to be a subject that I've been talking about a lot, but it needs to be talked about as much as possible. So when I bring on my guests, we're going to have a very in-depth conversation. It's going to be a little bit disturbing. I'm warning you right now. There's your trigger warning. But before we get into all of this, remember to like this video, share this, and subscribe. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every Wednesday and Friday evening at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard. But what we're going to talk about today is the effort to trans children. You know, I've been writing about that quite a bit. I feel like almost half my content is dedicated to the subject because what's going on is just so egregious. But I'm not the only one talking about this. So I'm going to bring him on with me, Mr. Brandon Showalter from the Christian Post, who has also covered this issue extensively. And we're going to talk a little bit about why this is so important. So welcome back to the program, Brandon.
Thank you, Jeff. It's good to be here.
Awesome. I was glad that I found out about you because I know that there are others who do what we do. But what I liked is that you are very passionate about this subject, and I think that we need more of that. And honestly, after you see what's going on, I don't see how you couldn't be. But this stuff needs to be exposed as much as possible, and you're out there doing the work. And I really appreciate what you're doing out there.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree more. When you see the atrocities that are being perpetrated against children, I don't know how you can look away. And as I often say, when I first learned about this a few years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, something inside me snapped and I was never the same again. There's just something that happens to you internally when you see a sterilized and disfigured minor child in your inbox that just shakes you to your depths, and you won't have it on your conscience to keep quiet about it. And so, as you know, God's providence would have it, I had a job in journalism, so I was in a position to do something about it in a way that many people aren't. But I do think anybody can take action in a meaningful way if they are as moved as I was about it. And I think it's incumbent upon every person, when you learn about these horrible things, to ask yourself what your part in this is, because it's one of the worst medical scandals of all time, in my view.
Yeah, I think so too. I started out doing this, writing and doing journalism commentary about 5 years ago. And I heard like whispers of this stuff, but mostly it was with adults. So, I would push back against the whole idea that a man could become a woman and all that, but I didn't realize how this was affecting children. And as I learned more about it about a year or two ago, and just seeing how much this has blown up is just, it just kind of shows where we've gone as a society. But here's my thing. Why do you think that this is all of a sudden, I'm not going to say all of a sudden, that's not accurate. Why has the push for this become so aggressive over the past few years?
The push to do it to children, you mean?
Yes, because before it was they wanted to promote it among adults, but now it seems like they are very adamant about pushing this among children.
It's a great question, because I think, they've been doing this to children in the U.S., as far as I know, starting back in 2007, when the first pediatric gender clinic opened in Boston. And so this rush to medicalize children along this experimental pathway has been happening for some time. But I think that from a spiritual perspective, I would just say that this is the enemy of our souls ratcheting up the intensity of his assault on the human body. And he fights dirty, and he hates children. He hates human beings who are made in God's image. So I think that maybe what we're seeing now, as this push just intensifies, is the thrashings of a defeated foe, and he's just pulling out all the stops and throwing the kitchen sink at anybody and everybody. And evil just continues to metastasize and grow. Personally, I'm of the view that none of these surgeries that disfigure the body, whether you're an adult or a child, are medically ethical. I don't think that because it's in pursuit of a physical impossibility, that of changing one's sex, and that is just not possible. But it is especially terrible when you're doing it to a vulnerable child who does not understand what's being done to them. We know that the human brain doesn't stop developing until age 25, according to the neuroscience. That's about when the lobes finish developing. And so why on earth would you allow someone under that age to consent to be sterile and to have a permanently disfigured body that they will very likely regret later. It's just the worst form of child abuse. There's just nothing like it. So I think to answer your question another way is that there's a lot of money to be made, Jeff, with this. And that sounds a conspiracy. I think when I was on your show last time, I talked about how it might sound tinfoil hat to talk about how much money can be made. That just sounds like a big pharma conspiracy theory. It's like, well, if you actually dig around and look, there are big medical institutions and billionaires and multimillionaires who stand to profit handsomely from sending increasing numbers of young people, children and teenagers, along this medicalized pathway. Planned Parenthood is in on this scheme now. They're passing out testosterone like it's candy to vulnerable girls. So take a look at who stands to make a lot of money off of this and follow the money. And I think you'll get an answer as to why there has been such a concerted push to get as many people down this path as possible. Because if there are more people who are then enslaved to these drugs and surgeries and follow-up surgeries and all of the supplies that are required to do that, you'll increase your profit margin.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that because we did talk about that on the last episode, and I had forgotten that I wrote this article, but I've written a little bit about this, about how some people are cashing in big on this stuff. Yeah. But I wanted to find out, when did you first find out this stuff was going on? Like, how did you even get exposed to it in the first place?
That's right. I knew a little bit about what I thought were transvestites, and it wasn't an area of expertise for me. I remember walking in a grocery store aisle and seeing the cover of Time magazine where that actor Laverne Cox, The Transgender Tipping Point, I believe was the name of the article. I think that was 2014. And I just remember thinking, oh, something is up. You don't just land on the cover of Time magazine when these people who say that they are transgender, they're born in the wrong body, the opposite sex, you don't just land a splashy cover like that and for there not to be something really stirring, because they're a teeny tiny portion of our society that may actually have the psychiatric condition called gender identity disorder, which is now gender dysphoria.
Right.
So I remember that was pretty alarming. And then to see, I believe it was the next year or the year after, 2015 or 16, when I saw Bruce Jenner, who now calls himself Caitlyn, in that smock on the Vanity Fair cover. I just saw there's an effort within big corporate media conglomerates to further this. And because previously I thought, those transvestites down at Mardi Gras in New Orleans, there's just a few eccentric people living on the margins.
Right.
I don't think any of these surgeries or drugs are ethical practices, because the human body, the sex of our body is stamped on the nucleus of every single cell.
Yes. You
can't change it, and you may be confused about it. And if you are, let's get you some counseling and some help. I don't want to, be a jerk. For some people, it's a really hard thing to deal with, and they deserve our compassionate care. But it was soon after I got started at the Christian Post. My first day on the job, believe it or not, was the day after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. And so I was thrown into covering all these LGBT issues because of the news. And this is during my trial period. And then I got formally hired after that. And I started falling down the rabbit hole, as I sometimes like to say. And I realized that the news coverage that around these issues, where they were calling males she and her, it was so confusing that even as a journalist, as I'm trying to figure out, how do I even write about this, because the language is so corrupted and twisted.
Right.
And I saw how this was all part of a larger ideology that relies upon overtaking our very means of communication, our language. And it was so confusing, but then the confusion is precisely the point. And because people are so confused about it, it inhibits them from seeing the other medical atrocities that I would then later learn about. And on one particular day, I had come back from, it was a cross-partisan panel. There were 2 conservatives and 2 left-wingers presenting here in town about the threat of gender ideology to women's rights, but they also brought in the medical aspect, where children were being given experimental chemical puberty blockers, hormone blockers, then opposite sex hormones, synthetic hormones, and then perhaps even a disfiguring surgery. And I'd read a little bit that I had I think I'd read a little bit about all of that previously, but it was just so bewildering. It's like, they're not doing that to children. Oh, yes, they are.
Yeah.
And so I remember that day walking back from that panel, feeling like something inside of me had snapped and that my head was going to spin off my body. And pretty soon thereafter, I remember speaking with my editors and saying, we at the Christian Post, since the rest of the media is so captured, we've got to scrutinize this and cover this diligently. We ended up writing, our whole team did a series on transgenderism, and we just have been covering it in depth ever since. I'm not the only one who reports on this. Some of my other colleagues do, but I've been the lead reporter tackling these issues. And the deeper I go into it, the more horrifying it gets, because when you see a child being sterilized and mutilated, there's just no horror like it. And then you hear from parents who are in excruciating agony as their teenage girls are going to Planned Parenthood and getting testosterone, as I mentioned earlier. The exquisite form of torture that this is for the family, for the families that go through this, cannot be overstated. There is no anguish and suffering like when this ideology invades a home. It's horrific. And so I have to speak out for those who don't have a voice, because a lot of these families, if they criticize this publicly, they'll get fired from their jobs. So many of the institutions will have been captured where there's this culture of fear that surrounds it. And the worst of all is when they're told by doctors and therapists that unless you affirm your child as the opposite sex, they are or are very likely to kill themselves, take their lives by suicide. And so that just freezes them in this state of panicked fear, and they're paralyzed. And they wind up finding my work at the Christian Post and sending me a desperate email or calling me. And I try to do whatever I can to help them and continue to expose it, because it's just so horrible. It's just so bad.
It is. I mean, and I want to touch on something that you said, like, as you started to dig into it, it just got worse and worse. And that's what I've experienced over this past year.
Yes.
I'm like, how much worse can this get? First, I was like, okay, this needs to stop. It's happening to children. We need to stop. Then I find out that it's happening to more children than I thought it was. Then I find out that in 2018, they did a study saying that the number of girls identifying as transgender went up by 4,000%. Then I found out the statistics. In England. Then I found out the stats that I gave you guys last week in Florida about that over 100% increase in children taking puberty blockers. Then, even before that, I'm seeing these people posting pictures online about, these girls having top surgery, which is a double mastectomy to remove their breasts, showing off the scars. Like, this is something to be proud of. And knowing when I'm looking at that picture, I'm thinking in 5 years, they're going to be suffering because of that.
Maybe
like
sooner.
It's horrible. It just keeps getting worse and worse. And then not even to mention the impact of puberty blockers on people who become adults later, and just the way it mangles their bodies from the inside. I don't understand why. I do understand why there isn't more of a backlash, but it's amazing that they've been able to get away with this for so long.
Well, and the reason that's the case is, again, with the corruption of language. The reason that I emphasize that a lot when I sometimes go out and talk about this is that the journalists in our legacy press are totally captured by this ideology. And the reason it's so insidious and sinister is that they've already lent credence to the false lingo. And because it's shrouded in all of these euphemisms, the truth can't be clearly seen. And so they've gotten away with this because it's called gender-affirming care. Mm-hmm. It's not called disfigurement, body disfigurement, or sterilization. Journalists are most culpable for this medical scandal because they have been the protection racket around these medical institutions that are doing this to children, because they call it different things. They lie, the very things that they should be using words to expose what's coming. Of course, they don't have a moral framework that's remotely connected to biology or reality, and so that's a hindrance as well. But and then there's the money influence too, which we can also talk about. But the very thing that they should be using to expose the atrocities are the very things that are covering it up. Because if this this is the standard of care according to all these vaunted organizations, which are now captured by ideologues. They'll get away with it because it's not being exposed. We sound like crazy people off our rockers, but as the pictures, especially, pictures worth 1,000 words.
Yes.
I think people who see those young, poor girls with armpit to armpit scar across their midsection after having their breasts removed, and those sad eyes that you sometimes see, those photos just kill me. When people see that, I think that as more and more people are exposed to it, people have a gut sense, okay, something's not right here. It's not okay to do this to a child, because first of all, especially if they're healthy, but by what standard of medical ethics are you cutting off a physically healthy body part? When did that become okay? That doesn't magically become an ethically sound thing to do just because you wave a rainbow flag in the background. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the reason that it's gone on for so long is because the media has covered for them.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing is that we're starting to sound a little bit less crazy nowadays. I mean,
finally, yeah.
I mean, that's one good. I mean, there's a lot of bad things about social media, but one of the good things is that you get around the media that way. If you want to expose something, the media can't gatekeep you. You can just go on to, if they're not going to censor you, you can just go on Twitter and show it. But people do show this stuff on Twitter, and they let it ride. But here's what I've noticed. When we bring these things up and we say, stop trying to trans the kids in schools, look at what's happening in schools, the people who support this stuff, here's how they defend it. They don't defend it. They lie about it. They say, oh, that's not really happening, or that's just a one-off. Here's my thing. It'd be one thing if they said, yeah, this is happening in schools and it's a good thing, and this is why. Here's our arguments. They don't do that. There's only a few who do that. The rest of them, it's the same thing with the whole critical race theory issue and what's being taught in classes. They don't try to defend it because they know they can't. So what they do is they lie about it and say, oh, it's just happening every now and then. Oh, it's not happening that often. Don't look behind the curtain. But then you came along and wrote this article last month and dropped the receipts. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you put in that article, like some of the more egregious examples?
Well, you're absolutely right about the manipulation tactics that they pull, because they know the activists who are pushing this know that it's indefensible, and so they'll either minimize or deflect or gaslight or all manner of, or what they call DARVO, deny action, reverse victim offender. They'll totally flip it on you. Oh, why do you hate transgender children? They'll try. Why are you just a hateful bigot? They'll try to put you as paint you as a bad guy.
Wait, what was that again? You said DARVO. What is that again?
DARVO, DARVO, deny action, reverse victim offender, classic reversal manipulation technique.
We'll look that up.
It's crazy. I hate it so much. It's a form of gaslighting. They make you question your own perception of reality and paint you. The idea is to put you on the defensive, to make you defend your position when you're the rational, sane one, calling something egregious out. But the article that you referenced is I'm joking about it now because I've gotten several interviews out of that article because it made people's eyes pop. But I was so angry, Jeff, because I saw how the media was triaging and forming a phalanx around children's hospitals who had been exposed for doing these disfiguring surgeries on minors. In Boston, the Boston Children's Hospital, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, that's where the first pediatric gender clinic opened in 2007. That hospital put out videos with its own watermark talking about these body disfiguring surgeries that they do. Transgender children, as they say. I always put that in air quotes. And they call gender-affirming hysterectomies, gender-affirming mastectomies, phalloplasties, where they harvest forearm tissue from females to make a fake penis. I mean, I can't even believe that's a thing, but that here we are. These were their own doctors talking about it. And there was an activist by the name of Chris Elston, who goes by Billboard Chris, who downloaded all those videos and then sent them to the account Libs of TikTok, who then retweeted them. And then she's got, I think, 1.3 million followers. So the public then saw on social media, they're doing what to children? These just holding the mirror up, quoting these doctors in their own words. And everybody's was like, oh, what? And then later, of course, then the media, it was just amazing to see how they were totally running interference because they took the narrative, there's right-wing misinformation and threats against this children's hospital, when all they did was show their own videos and quote them in their own words. Well, the libs of TikTok gal, whose name is Chaya Raichik, I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
I think it's Raichik, yeah.
Raichik, then followed up, what she did was she screen captured, archived the website of National Children's Hospital here in DC. And This is a long story. I'm getting to the point here, but this is... Go
ahead.
She screen captured and downloaded their archived documents of their policies about how they approach gender-affirming, surgeries of that kind. And she found that indeed, they're, at least according to their public website, that they did this to 16-year-olds, to minors. These are hysterectomies. And then after what broke loose with Boston and all that riffraff, she noticed that they updated their website and they cleaned it up, make it sound like they didn't do it to minors. So what that she did was call the Washington, Children's National Hospital, and 2 separate staffers said, yes, we do indeed do these gender-affirming hysterectomies on 16-year-olds. She acted like she was a mom of a transgender son who wanted a hysterectomy, and 2 different staffers, she then uploaded that footage. Everybody could hear the 3 minutes of audio online. And again, NPR, Washington Post, just totally running interference, protecting this children's hospital. Now, how many gender-affirming hysterectomies have gone on at Children's National? We don't know. But we heard with our own ears, 2 different people that they at least say they do it. And I think the line from the Children's Hospital, because they came out with a statement denying it, the line was that, these people had wrong information. This is not correct. We don't do it to, minors or whatever. Well, she had the archived captures, and she's like, well, really? Look here. I've got this is what you used to say, and now you're saying something different. Which is it? She had all the receipts. But as I saw them running interference for these children's hospital, the media, the legacy media, I just started fuming, because I actually know someone, Jeff, whose daughter ran away to, I believe it was the state of Oregon, and on an outpatient basis at age 17, got both her breasts removed and her entire reproductive system cut out at age 17.
Oh my God.
So I knew someone personally where this had happened to them as a minor.
Without her parents' consent, right?
The mother was not in favor of it, and she was on a different state. And so why that's even allowed to go to a different state to do this. And I think
that's what California's trying to be.
Yes, and I don't think that law has been signed yet, but it's likely to be signed, where people can come from out of state, even if they're minors, and do this against the will of their parents. All this to say, I was just so enraged by seeing how the media was just lying through their teeth about this, that I thought, all right, I've seen enough of the peer-reviewed medical literature, the journal articles where these gender clinicians talk amongst themselves. I'm just going to do what Libs of TikTok does, because she posts a lot of TikTok videos and other damning informations where she's just holding the mirror up and quoting what they themselves say and holding up their antics and showing them to be what they are. I'm going to do that journalistically. And I just made a collated list of some of the most recent, journal articles from the last several years, where the gender clinicians themselves say that, yes, they have done these disfiguring mastectomies, hysterectomies, vaginoplasty surgeries on minors. And I gave you the citations: JAMA Pediatrics, Obstetrics and Gynecology, the Journal of Clinical Medicine, the Lancet. These are prominent peer-reviewed medical journals that, okay, you don't believe me? Don't take my word for it. Don't believe the Christian Post. Read the journals for yourselves. You can just see what I said. I give you, in some examples, I give the data tables and the page numbers and the article titles. Here you go. You're saying you don't do this to minors? Yes, you do, and I can prove it. And here are the receipts.
I mean, you can't argue with that. I mean, you can't argue with it.
It's the original source material. It's the documents that speak for themselves.
And it gets around, because you mentioned, the Christian Post, because there are people who are just going to dismiss it just because it's in the Christian Post. Yeah. Now, these aren't serious people. These are intellectually lazy people. I won't dismiss something just because it comes from CNN. Might be a little bit doubtful, but I'll read it. I'll see what they say, at least.
But if you can get the original source material, it's the proof's in the pudding.
Exactly. You know, and there's so many examples, and I meant to send you the story, but you may already know about it. But speaking of this happening when people can go to different states, there was like a Wisconsin Pride Festival that they had where they were giving out letters of readiness. Yeah, so to minors so that they can get these operations potentially behind their parents' backs.
Yeah, I saw that photo. It's
disgusting.
It's astonishing how there is no oversight with any of this in this gender space. The way in which people are able to obtain hormones within 30 minutes at Planned Parenthood, as I keep mentioning, or you mentioned that Wisconsin events where you're getting surgery referral letters. I know of girls who've gotten by telehealth calls, they get letters for surgery for just a few minutes. I mean, you're going to permanently disfigure your body, and you're just going to within a few quick moments say that you're ready. No follow-up, no counseling, no psychiatric evaluation, nothing. I mean, none of this is ethical, but you would expect there might be at least some safeguards. Nope. They're gone.
No. So when you wrote the article, like, I'm sure you got a lot of positive feedback, but did you get any negative feedback, people trying to refute what you put in the article?
It was just more the same manipulation. Those who dared to antagonize me or leave these mean and nasty comments, it was just flat out denial. They can't defend it, as we were saying. I mean, it's so terrible. But again, it's the power of linking to the original source material, where if you want to check me, just go and see if what I've hyperlinked is correct. I simply requoted what the people doing this have said and written. So if you want to, your issue really isn't with me. So to answer your question, no. I mean, they can't refute it because it's right there.
Yeah.
That's just a sample. We don't have good data in a lot of this. I mean, I know some really good investigative journalists who have dug around in different state health departments to try and find figures of what's going on, and they get told don't ask these questions, or it's so hard to find. And I think that in and of itself is a medical scandal, Jeff, because how many are being experimented on these? I mean, these are not scrupulous people. They're willing to cut your breasts off after 30. I mean, give you a surgery referral letter. It's like, just how much is being tracked here very closely. What I can say, and this is documented in sort of Abigail Schreier's Watershed book, Irreversible Damage. I believe it was the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, which I've seen this chart as well, that from between 2016 and 2017, the number of females who underwent some kind of a gender surgery quadrupled. And the numbers have increased steadily ever since. And even during 2020, when medical facilities were locked down because of COVID, as far as I can tell, my reading of the numbers say that they kept going with those things. They increased. They're not slowing down. And the market projection value, according to Global Market Insights, by 2026, I think I forget the exact figure, but they're planning for tremendous growth, like 25% growth. I believe it's going to be worth multi-millions, maybe even into the billions of dollars. This is an industry. They're out to make money. So this isn't about healthcare at all. It's about padding the wallets of some very wealthy people.
Yeah. Speaking of that, speaking of plastic surgeons, and speaking of this whole trans grift, because that's what it is now. I'm sure you're familiar with I'm going to mangle her first name, but Dr. Sidib Gallagher in Miami.
Sidib, her name, it's actually pronounced Sive.
Sive.
It's an Irish, I don't know if it's Gaelic or whatever, Sidhbh. It's a very weird spelling, pronounced like five, but with an S, Sive. Her name is Sive Gallagher.
What did the ancient Irish not know how to spell or something? I mean,
it's the weirdest name. Sidib. It looks like your name is Sidib. I don't know how you would pronounce it, but I've read that online. Her name is Sive.
Sive. Okay.
Sive.
Yeah, more like side, like
yeah,
bad joke. But I mean, you're familiar with it. I mean, she goes on TikTok, and you know how people will advertise their businesses on TikTok, like if you're selling cars or you're selling lamps or whatever. She goes on TikTok and she actually advertises her services and straight up says that she does this to teenagers. She shows herself posing with these teenagers and their parents after they've had the top surgery. So to say that it's not happening and that it's just a few one-offs here and there. No, this chick is making money from doing this. Like, no, come on. No, like it's getting, and as disgusting as it is, there's a silver lining to her doing this because she's exposing what's happening, even though that's not her intention. So it's going to get even more difficult for these people to keep lying about it. So I'm wondering what they're going to do next when they can't say that this isn't happening anymore. I think I know what tactic they're going to use.
It is so gory and exhibitionist because these people who are doing this are, I think, pathological narcissists, and they're just craving for attention. These are seriously disturbed people who are doing this to young people. That you would think that if you were really smart, you'd still try to make as much money as you can and not expose these kinds of things. If are you at all aware that if most people see this, they're not going to be okay with this, so why would you then broadcast this? And Dr. Syed Gallagher not only poses with these young people that she has disfigured, but she has these little phrases that she makes up. I think there's many things that I've seen her. I can't bear to watch those TikTok videos with her eyes bug out of her head. It's just the creepiest, most disturbing thing. She's she's this blonde, long hair, Irish woman who physically, that's what's so insidious about it. She's, creepy eyes, but I mean, just, you don't think that a physically attractive woman or a handsome man, there's this other doctor who's, he's a good looking guy, I guess I can say. I've seen him holding up 2 buckets of breast tissue with with a Santa Claus hat on. And it's so awful, but
it's marketing now.
But it's marketing. I was saying Syed Gallagher, she makes up these little phrases in some of her TikTok videos. The one that I was going to mention was, she's got this screenshot I've seen where her eyes look sad. And she said, I found out I only get to yeet 4 teats next week or something like that. It's just like this is some kind of joke, or I mean, what in the world? And how many kids do you want to chop up? I mean, it's just, it's so bad. And if people are grossed out listening to me talk about this, good, because you need to be disgusted, because I don't know what it's going to take for people to be jolted out of their stupor, because I won't have it on my conscience for one child to be maimed in this way, let alone the thousands who have now been irreversibly harmed.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, the word yeet is like a colloquial expression that the kids use. It means to throw something away. So when she's saying yeet the teats, it's talking about cutting them off and throwing them away. It's that disgusting. And she's saying this with pride. And like, I know in that particular one, she was pretending to be sad, but it was a joke. And she enjoys doing this.
And she totally lies about, when her TikTok videos about, she totally minimizes the pain, the after post-operative recovery. It's like, it's no big deal. People feel better after this. It's bad for a little while. Meanwhile, if you dare to go on like the detransition threads on Reddit or some of these places where these people who've been disfigured and maimed, they talk about what it's really like and how this didn't solve their problems, and how, for example, after these boys undergo a vaginoplasty, and what they do is in order to make a fake female sex organ, they take a swatch. This is what the surgeons will often do. Will take a swatch of bowel tissue to make it like a female sex organ, to make it appear like one. But unlike an actual female sex organ, which is hooked up to the female endocrine system, it takes care of itself. It self-cleans. It's got the kind of hormones and all. It's all connected. Our bodies are integrated whole beings. You don't just chop parts off and put body parts on and expect it to work as it's intended to work. But because they use bowel tissue, these fake Frankenstein female, they're not even real female sex organs, fills with fecal bacteria and smells terrible. So they're walking around smelling like a toilet, and they can't urinate right. And just some of the pictures that I've seen just send me into apoplexy. Like, what are we doing to the human body and calling it healthcare?
Yep.
It's bad.
Yeah. Gender-affirming care. I think I heard you on another podcast saying that you get a workout because you're always doing this. But that is.
Yeah, if my fingers were biceps, I'd be on the cover of Men's Fitness. All this air quotes I'm making. Yeah, I mean but that's
But you
some
have to.
people may get annoyed by all the air quotes or whatever, but that's so important because it communicates that they've hijacked language. So when I do these air quotes, I'm signaling to those activists, you don't fool me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know what you're doing, and I will not capitulate into lending credence to your dogma with my words. I will not lie.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to talk about, what's happening in the United Kingdom and Sweden. I mean, these places are even more left wing than a lot of our progressives, so-called progressives that we have in the US.
Yeah.
But they've been doing this stuff for longer, this gender affirming care, and now they're backing off of it. I know you wrote an article about how the UK is doing it, shutting down their Tavistock facility. So I want you to speak to that. But also in Sweden, there's a study that Sweden did, and the reason that they're backing off of this is that they found that people who got puberty blockers as kids or went through this gender affirming care, medically or surgically, were 19 times more likely to commit suicide as adults. So when we're looking at this, I mean, before I even ask this question, why don't you kind of go over what the United Kingdom found and what they've been doing and when it comes to this issue?
You're right that Europe, UK, Sweden, and Finland as well. I think France also. Europe is backing away from this experimental medicalized treatment protocol. Sweden, the study that you mentioned, is I think from 1973. It was 30 years where they followed just about every person who underwent trans surgery.
Yep.
And you're correct that they found that it was a 19 times higher hazard of completed suicide after they were transed. Most recently, then the Karolinska Hospital in Sweden is also they found with the puberty blockers, and so they're backing away. To your question about the UK, yes, the Tavistock Clinic, which was the big National Health Service clinic, gender identity clinic, is shutting down after they did an independent review, and then also followed on a judicial review where a detransitioner brought a case against them and explained how she was not adequately informed about the risks. Kira Bell was her name, and originally the court ruled in her favor, and then it was overruled. But then they had that independent review, and they found that the record keeping at the Tavistock was shoddy. A disproportionate number of the patients there were autistic. There was not good clinical practices. Whistleblowers were not listened to. There were many people who've been trying to raise the alarm bells from within, and so this independent review recommended and ordered that by 2023 this place shutter. We'll have to keep a watchful eye, because what then also came out was that we're just going to open regional offices, and they're going to sort of spread out to different places around the UK and not just have this headquarters in London where the Tavistock Clinic is based. So I, kind of a trust but verify kind of thing. Symbolically, it's huge to see the Tavistock be closed. It's big. But you're right. And to your point about progressives and left-wingers, it's quite strange to see US and Canadian progressives genuflecting before big pharma. I mean, isn't that a little bit strange? I mean, because here it's just full bore, pharma saturated, medical industrial complex money and activism gestated within these powerful, prominent institutions. And people that you would normally think might be willing to look at that with a little bit of suspicion are totally, drunk on the gender Kool-Aid, as I might say. I mean, they're totally accepting this hook, line, and sinker. They will not scrutinize it or criticize it, despite the fact that I get phone calls from very left-wing feminists, lesbians, gay men, progressive Democrats, some of whom tell me they'll never vote Democrat again.
Yeah.
Because of when this goes on in their families, they're like, I'm done. But the party on the ground, a lot of them don't support it. And I'll talk to anybody, Jeff. I don't care what your politics are. If you're being harmed by this, I don't want to see anybody, regardless of their political affiliation, put through this meat grinder. I mean, it's horrific. But the parties are, and the Republican Party, I'm going to be hard on them too. A lot of them are just cowards and craven, and there's corporate opportunities that they won't do anything to push back because they don't want to upset people with money, and it's just there are some Republicans who I think are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to take steps to protect children, especially against this medical experimentation. But there's a lot of corruption in our government with all of this. But the Democratic Party especially is locked down. And again, I think it's strange because you would have thought in a normal time that they would be the ones to say, this is going to enrich big pharma. These are big corporate powerful players. We should scrutinize them some more. Nope, not here, not in this space.
Well, yeah, and I think we saw over the COVID-19 pandemic that Democrats are all about big pharma when it aligns with what their agenda is. So I think that's what's going on here. But that actually kind of brings up another question, because we talked about the financial aspect of this, the fact that this has become an industry, but it's not all money. So the people who support this stuff, even if they don't have a financial interest in it, why are they into this? Like, I'm sure that there are plenty of people who actually believe that gender affirming care actually helps these kids and people who are older. But what do you think is the overall agenda here, aside from the financial interest?
Wow. I'm stumbling around because I think that the money is the thing.
Okay.
I mean, the love of money, Jesus said, is the root of all kinds of evil.
That's true.
And so sometimes I like to say that Mammon and Moloch are, if you see the spiritually speaking, Mammon and Moloch often work side by side.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would be remiss as a Christian to not say that this is a celestial battle spiritually. The enemy of our souls waging war on the human body against children, against male and female. He targets that with ferocious rage. Spiritually, that's the backdrop, the Ephesians 6. I keep mentioning that because I can't escape that, because that shapes how I think about these things. But when you see child sacrifice going on, because that's what this is just another form of child sacrifice. That's Moloch and Mammon, which is love of money. It's just, they go together. There have been people that have suggested to me, and I totally get why, that this is some kind of a depopulation scheme. And I'd have to, the people, because whenever you target fertility, you're sterilizing these young people. You're going to reduce Now, I'm not going to assert that that's actually what's going on, because as a journalist, I'd want to have to see firsthand evidence where you've got, population control advocates, pushing this in their own words, or some kind of document that says that that's exactly what they're doing. But I don't blame people for wondering. And, but to the money thing, and this is just so evil, just think about this. And for those who may be listening and they think that this still sounds kind of far out there and conspiratorial, because this is built on a lie, that it's actually possible to be born in the wrong body, because that's what they are told.
Right.
That these children who are just so troubled, they don't have something wrong with their body, it's their entire body itself is wrong. In order to fix it, you're going to have to go on these experimental hormonal agents that have never been tested or clinically approved for this purpose, and then follow that on with cross-sex hormones and then surgeries. You're going to have to be a medical patient for life. So you're going to be on years and years and years of this. And so that's a very big income stream.
Yeah. Somebody's
going to pay for this. I forget, my friend Jennifer Billick, who has done the yeoman's work, just the best job of any investigative journalist in this space that I know. Her writing can be seen at the 11th Hour blog, and she's also published a couple blockbusters, one in the Federalist in 2018, and most recently in Tablet magazine, which is a Jewish publication, about some of the billionaires who are pushing this and stand to profit from all of this. I totally recommend everybody go read her work if you want to know more. But you medicalize a child, you've got a lifelong medical patient, and you're going to get sick. So either way, they laugh all the way to the bank, those who make money off of this, because it's a lie. And you can really make a lot of money if you continue to sell people a lie that this is just going to fix all your problems.
A massive con job.
Go away. So I emphasize the money because that just, I don't think it can be emphasized enough. But it is, again, as Jesus said, it's the love of that is the root of all kinds of evils. And so all of those evils spring from this illegitimate way of, making a living. I'm not against making money. I'm against money in a way that's exploitative and unjust. And this is the epitome of an injustice.
Yeah, it most definitely is. And I want to talk about how to combat this. And I want to run something by you because based on the conversations that I've had, the stuff that I've read, what I've observed, what I've written about, I think I've identified a few different ways that this stuff has to be fought. I mean, the one pillar is exposure, exposing it. That's what you and I do. That's our job. We expose this stuff. We show how bad it is. We show how prevalent it is. And when we get it in front of as many eyes as possible. The other pillar would be through government legislation. What kind of legislation that can be passed at the state level, federal level, or what have you, to put a stop to this. Like here in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott and the DPFS are basically investigating cases where children are being mutilated as child abuse. I'm not sure how long that'll last because it does have to be enshrined into law. Right. But that's one aspect. But then there's also the legal route. Lawsuits using the court system. You have groups like Parents Defending Education and America First Legal. I was just speaking with Ian Pryor about this, and they file lawsuits. That they have one going on right now against the Eau Claire School District in Wisconsin, which is instructing teachers that parents are not entitled to know about their child's gender identity. So those are three important pillars. The most important is the spiritual aspect, which I think covers all three of what I just listed off. So these three are the ways to push back against this stuff and to stop it. There's also societal too. I forgot that one. Societal, the persuasion game, showing people what's going on and persuading them that this isn't right. But all of that is under the aegis of the spiritual. Like God's going to have to move in all these areas, and he needs people in all these areas to help fight this stuff and other evils as well. I mean, we're honing in on this issue, but there's all kinds of evil going on in America. But what do you think? Do you think I'm missing anything, or do I think, or what do you think?
No, I'm totally tracking with you there. And I have said when I talk about this that I think it's going to have to be supernatural what happens. I'll do my little part. And I've prayed often that maybe one of my articles or something else that somebody else does would be like the rock that hits Goliath in the forehead, and then he falls, and then we slice his head off and then plunder the resources of the enemy's camp. And this particular enemy's camp has a lot of dough. So I'm just going to believe for God to transfer the ill-gotten gains of the wicked into the hands of the righteous. And we'll maybe be able to use some of that to help all these detransitioners, these refugees from this medical experimentation. I mean, I pray often that the Lord would somehow sovereignly move against this in a way that only he can, because what's so horrible about this, and there are so many horrible aspects about this, is that all the institutions are corrupted. I mean, the capture of the media, of the medical system, of counseling industry, of the education system, they're all peddling this trash. It's insane. And so we truly are. I mean, if you're a Christian and you're a small O Orthodox believer, you're about it. There's a couple, so it's up to you to be bold and talk amongst your families and do whatever it is that the Lord instructs you to do. And the one thing that I want to just say to people who are becoming aware of how deep and how terrible all of this is you don't have any time to waste. Start speaking somehow and just be willing to pay the cost, because the bodies of young, vulnerable children are literally on the line. And I won't have it on my conscience to be quiet about this. There's just nothing, there just isn't anything like seeing a picture of these maimed and disfigured young people and for it to be applauded and celebrated as somehow this wonderful thing, when it's exactly the opposite. And Jesus has some pretty strong words about those who lead children astray and hurt children. And as I also sometimes say, there ain't a millstone heavy enough for people who are slicing up their bodies and destroying their fertility and torturing and abusing these poor children. I have such contempt for these workers of iniquity that are just child abuse. You get me going, get me hot under the collar. You abuse a child, and I just will not shut up about it. I don't care what people think of me. I really don't. This is wrong, and it needs to stop yesterday.
Unfortunately, this is ongoing, so we'll be dealing with this. Hopefully not for too much longer. I mean, actually, let me just ask you that. Are you optimistic about this battle, or do you think that it'll get worse, or how do you think it's going to turn out?
I am optimistic about this battle, but I'm going to act like we're 10 points behind. And as for my journalistic work and the things that I'm called to do, I'm not going to stop pushing until this house of cards collapses, and not one moment sooner, I won't be stopping. Because some people see the tide turning, even as it is turning, and I'm seeing signs of that, I'm not going to be celebrating, because there's a lot of work ahead of us, especially ministering and helping those who have been permanently harmed by this. And I think, if you're more of the type of personality that is just not wired to be bold and out there and declaring the truth, like the prophet in the street or whatever, maybe ask the Lord about how you might serve the incoming refugees and how you can create space to help these poor people who have had their bodies permanently ruined. And maybe we'll see God do some creative, great miracles of healing too. I'm all for that as well.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, figure out how you're going to help all these people that have been victimized. Because Jeff, when this spell breaks off of our society, and when God finally crushes and smashes the stranglehold of this wretched ideology out of our institutions, when that finally happens, I think you and I and a few others are going to be among the few that's not shocked by the scope of how many people have been harmed. Everybody, I think people are going to be, well, I think it could be as many as millions of people certainly the brainwashing, but because we don't have good numbers, tens of thousands I know have been undergone some kind of surgery, and more are getting hormones. So when this all sort of the fallout emerges and we can see it clearly, I think the figures are going to be staggering.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that part, but I am looking forward to this whole thing to come crashing down. But before we sign up,
here's the other thing: a lie always eventually collapses under the weight of its own, under its own weight. The question is how many people have to be harmed by it in the meantime.
Yeah,
and I won't have it on my conscience again. I won't have it on my conscience to see another. I mean, no more. We're done. This has to stop.
It needs to stop. It needs to stop. Yeah, like you said yesterday. So it does need to stop. But before we sign up, why don't you let everybody know where they can find your work and where they can find you online?
Well, my Twitter handle is @BrandonM Show, and you can follow my byline at christianpost.com. And most recently, I was featured in Tucker Carlson's original documentary called Transgressive: The Cult of Confusion, which is available now on Fox Nation. I'm also in an Epoch TV, it's streaming on Epoch by Frank Panico. It's a film called Transrec. And there's another documentary that's coming out soon, which I can't say too much about, but it's on the horizon. And there are a couple other documentaries. Because the media is so deceitful, independent filmmakers are filling the void, and their work is going to be released soon too. So there are truth tellers out there. You just have to look. But yeah, Twitter, Brandon M Show, CP is where you can find my articles. And do check out the Fox Nation documentary. Tucker's team did a terrific job.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, and I'll look forward to seeing those.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be with you.